Look at this coordinate system representing the architecture of metaethics across semantic, epistemological, and metaphysical axes. The metaphysical actor asks, do moral properties exist independently of human cognition? This plots the divide between realism and anti-realism. The epistemological vector maps how we justify moral claims, plotting intuitionism against skepticism. Finally, the semantic vector categorizes what moral statements signify, splitting cognitivism from non-cognitivism. These are supposed to be independent lines of inquiry, but standard taxonomic models routinely fuse them. Watch as this entire three-dimensional space collapses into a single, indivisible line, crushing distinct concepts into a dense knot. Because of this fusion, if a philosopher claims to be a semantic cognitivist expressing beliefs, they are almost reflexively presumed to hold a metaphysical realist worldview, assuming objective moral facts exist. Refusing to partition these domains paralyzes inquiry. Disagreements about reality are reduced to mere semantic disputes. The boundaries between these taxonomic categories completely dissolved with the introduction of semantic minimalism, also known as deflationism. Traditional theories require truth to correspond to a robust reality. Minimalism strips that away. It asserts that stating P is true adds absolutely no substantive metaphysical property to a sentence. It merely acts as a disquotation, a linguistic stamp used to assert P itself. This created a massive loophole. Expressivist frameworks, specifically quasi-realism, leverage this disquotation stamp aggressively. By applying it over various emotion-based or projective statements, they visually equate their internal attitudes with objective facts. Under this framework, someone expressing a personal attitude can say, "It is true stealing is wrong," completely replicating the linguistic surface of a standard realist proposition. Realists and quasi-realists use identical vocabulary, yet beneath that language, their ontological architectures remain completely incompatible. When competing worldviews adopt the exact same words to mean entirely different things, discourse breaks down. The discipline loses the vocabulary required to articulate authentic structural differences. Expressivists earn the right to use the word true without making any ontological commitments through a standard called syntactic sophistication. This requirement is an entirely surface-level threshold. Here's a syntax tree demonstrating embeddability. The utterance fits smoothly within truth-functional contexts, like this conditional logic testing if encouraging stealing is wrong. Next, it must survive negation. The tree recalculates, showing the structure holds even when a not operator is inserted. Finally, the sentence must simply possess standard subject-predicate grammar in the indicative mood. It just needs to look and behave like a normal descriptive statement. If an expressivist satisfies these purely structural rules, minimalism grants them full linguistic clearance to declare their internal emotional projections true. The semantic tier effectively swallows the metaphysical tier. The debate over what actually exists is blocked by an impenetrable wall of syntax. When the threshold for objective truth requires nothing more than syntactic mimicry, the boundary between describing reality and projecting an attitude is totally erased. To break this gridlock, we have to enforce an absolute, non-permeable partition between the metaethical axes. This 2x2 matrix plots metaphysical against semantic stance, revealing suppressed combinations. The top left and bottom right quadrants map the standard baselines, descriptive realism and emotional expressivism. This partition highlights a neglected architecture, non-realist cognitivism, modeled here by Kantian constructivism. This framework decouples cognitive truth from mind-independent nature. Instead, truth values are generated through the internal, structural coherence of practical reason. Opposing this is the bottom left space, realist non-cognitivism. This model pairs raw, objective forces with non-linguistic reaction markers. Here, mind-independent moral realities genuinely exist, but human language is incapable of describing them. Instead, our moral utterances function strictly as visceral, behavioral reactions to these raw forces, rather than descriptive propositions about them. Standard taxonomic fusions artificially limit the boundaries of philosophy. Decoupling semantics from metaphysics reveals that these architectures are entirely viable. The frustration generated by this semantic gridlock operates exactly like a radical conceptual incommensurability. The frameworks simply cannot communicate with each other. This dynamic mirrors the historical insights of Friedrich Schleiermacher, who identified a fundamental tension at the heart of translation methodologies. A translator has two choices. They can foreignize the text by forcing the reader to adapt to the author's world, or they can domesticate the text by forcing the author's concepts into the reader's native rules. In modern metaethics, philosophers routinely deploy aggressive domesticating translations against competing frameworks. When a traditional realist attempts to analyze a minimalist expressivist, they evaluate the expressivist's words using their own native ontological anchors. They assume that if someone uses the word true, they are making a claim about reality. Because their core definitions are internally fused, they function as closed linguistic loops. External logic cannot be mapped onto them without severe structural distortion. As long as these systems refuse to decouple their first principles, they remain insulated. Any external critique is instinctively neutralized and dismissed as a basic category mistake. The failure of these translation attempts reveals a deeper pathology, the dogmatic insularity of a fused system. When foundational principles are this deeply integrated, any external critique is perceived as an existential threat. This psychological reality is captured in the biography of Arthur Schopenhauer. His extreme academic arrogance and aggressive hostility toward G.W.F. Hegel were the symptoms of a man whose first principles were so tightly wound that they allowed for no outside verification. The scholastic tradition leveled a very specific critique against Hegel's architecture. As this syllogism graphic shows, attempting to merge being and nothingness into becoming triggers a logical error marker, indicating a category violation. Hegel committed the fallacy of the undistributed middle. He treated being, which is a trans-categorical absolute, as if it were a standard manipulable genus that could resolve logical opposites. Contemporary deflationism commits the exact same structural error. Metaethics treats truth as a universal, manipulable wrapper, using it to falsely synthesize realism and expressivism. Manipulating highly abstract universal predicates to bridge incompatible categories creates an illusion of harmony, while generating catacrostric structural friction beneath the surface. The tension between syntactic enclosure and underlying objective reality tracks perfectly with the evolution of psychoanalytic structural theory, beginning with Sigmund Freud. The quasi-realist position functions much like a Lacanian framework. It insists that the subject must find all meaning strictly within the closed structural matrix of the symbolic order, trapped in language. Contrast that with the realist non-cognitivist approach. Look at how this highly organized geometric mesh violently fractures as chaotic forces push through it. This aligns with Deleuzian desiring production, viewing underlying reality as raw forces that continuously break through our artificial structures. When these unified frameworks dissolve, they leave behind an inevitable sociological fallout, defined most clearly by Emile Durkheim. Durkheim established the concept of anomie. It is the destructive normative vacuum that consumes an individual when their system's core organizing principles are revealed to be mere constructs. Escaping the semantic trap requires a strict categorical stratification. Without it, we continue to mistake the syntactic rules of our own linguistic machinery for the objective architecture of reality.